Now, direct from Minneapolis, Minnesota, I'm pleased to introduce Scott Schmerstick, Blu Dot senior designer, who will share what went into the design and development processes behind Decade, a chair that took 2 years and a full do-over to get it right. Scott is joined by Ashton Jones, a former Christmas tree designer, now senior assortment manager. She will dig into how Blu Dot decides what to design next and the challenges of building product lines that meets people's needs while being timeless. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Hi, everybody. As Alyssa said, my name is Scott Schmerstick. I'm a senior designer at Blu Dot. I've been with the company for, over 15 years now. I studied product design at University of Wisconsin Stout. So that's in Menominee, Wisconsin, kind of a tiny town just outside of the Twin Cities. And I joined Blu Dot as an intern, and I've been here ever since. So I've designed everything from candelabras to sofas, different kinds of dressers and case goods. So I'm excited to share with you the design story of our Decade chair.
And I am Ashton Jones. I am, as Alyssa said, the senior assortment manager, which I'm sure a lot of you are like, what does that mean? But that basically means, so Blu Dot, we design everything that we make, obviously, but someone has to come up with what we're going to design and why, and how much it's going to cost, how many finishes is it going to come in, what colors is it going to come in. And then eventually, when do we discontinue something? So I get to have the pleasure of, coming up with the start of the design all the way through the life cycle of when we eventually discontinue something. So I have the most fun job, and I get to work with these wonderful designers every day.
Yeah, and Ashton, I forget, how long have you been with Blu Dot now?
I have been here it'll be 6 years next month, which is crazy. So
it's wild.
It's been
it's
so
wild.
fun.
It's so great to have you part of the team now. So back when I first started, we would just get random briefs from John and Maurice, and it was so much harder to be diplomatic about it and kind of manage that relationship. So anyway, should we show this video?
Yeah, let's do it. So this is a video that we shot when we won the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award, and it just gives a fun little background on the brand and where we are today, and you'll hear a little bit from our founders in it. So go ahead.
We started Blu Dot at a time when modern design was dominated by people at the high end like B&B Italia or Polyform and really just IKEA at the low end. There was really nothing in between. Everything we liked, we couldn't afford. Everything we could afford, we didn't like. And we were naive enough to try and change that.
It was important to us that the company had sort of a humble persona. We were reacting against kind of the heroic designers. What we loved about the history of modernism were the more modest figures like the Eames, who believed in democratizing design. We wanted to create design that could get out into the world. We didn't want it to be exclusive for just a few people that could afford it or could find it. We wanted it to be available to everybody. A decision that we made early on that I think defined what Blu Dot really became was the decision not to just be designers for hire, but actually to create an entire business and take on the manufacturing and the product development, inventory, marketing, and sales of the product. We're kind of unique in the furniture business in that way.
In taking on all the tasks beyond design, you have a special appreciation for some of the practical considerations that go into designing a product. So we have a high sensitivity to cost and efficiency so that we design something that can actually be retailed at a price that is affordable to many and will sell. And we have a high sensitivity to whether something can actually ship undamaged, because we deal with all those issues ourselves since we own the process from beginning to end. The ultimate form of our designs is really the residue of that process. From our earliest days, we designed as a group, the three of us. We had a long table with a roll of butcher paper, and we riffed off one another So when we introduced our very first collection, we didn't feel right about putting our individual names on any of the designs, and we still do that today.
Collaboration extends beyond just the design studio as well. So bringing a product to life is a very collaborative process through all the functions. So there's the design, there's the product development, collaboration with the supplier or the manufacturer, and the entire team to get it to market.
We feel so lucky to be doing this 20 years later. I mean, it's a dream job to come to Blu Dot every day and do what you love to do, and we're super excited about what the next 10 or 20 years brings.
So yeah, that was shot at our beautiful headquarters in Minneapolis, which is a dream space to work in, honestly. Okay, so moving into sort of deciding what to design and why we decided to design a plastic chair. I mean, obviously, one of the things that, really founded the brand is, bringing good design to as many people as possible. And a plastic chair is sort of this perfect mix of, it can be really high design, but it can be a really affordable, approachable price point for things. It's also something that, works great indoor or outdoor. It's, really durable. It's very cleanable, which is really important in this sort of post-COVID age. I mean, it takes color well, it becomes very sculptural. There are things that you can do with a plastic chair that you can't really execute with any sort of other constructed chair. So I think the freedom in that and whatnot is what really was exciting to us about this venture. And then again, yeah, so our goal is to bring good design to as many people as possible. And so going into something like this, that was definitely our main objective here. So then the other thing is that we really want to be intentional with how we're growing the brand. We've been around for over 20 plus years at this point, and we've really taken a really slow, strategic approach to our growth. I think once you start having success, it's really tempting to sort of grow just for growth's sake. But we don't want to just add stuff just to have more, SKUs in our assortment and just more stuff. We want every single product to be something that we really stand behind and that we're proud of. And we want it to have as much function and purpose as possible. And so I think that's something that we also really talk about when figuring out what we're going to design. So we ask ourselves these questions, what gap is this? Who is this for? Where does this fall in the current assortment in terms of price or, style or customer? Why is this needed? Who is asking for this? Is this what problems is this solving for a current customer? And then what are those key features to consider? Is it price? Is it durability? Is it, something that's going to be a really great application for a contract space? So we really are asking ourselves all of those questions for each and every product that we're making, so that we're putting our best foot forward with everything we decide to introduce. And then this is an example of, so once we've decided what those products are going to be, we have launches twice a year that are just that we introduce products. So we introduce product in January and July. And so the designers get what is called a design brief twice a year. So they get, on average, it's like what, 5, Scott, you would say?
Yeah, anywhere from 4 to 6.
Yeah, depending on what your current workload is and how difficult some of these briefs are. But they'll get basically 5 of these sorts of things. So this was one that Scott got recently, and this was a small space sort of personality shelf. So it sort of gives, examples of different directions that he could take this design. And then it has these things on the bottom that sort of guide him in terms of, what material should he be considering? What is the price point that we're trying to achieve? Is this something that's going to be a high use trade item or contract item that has to pass certain testing qualifications? And then, quality is sort of like, is this going to be something that's really expensive and really in high-end materials like leather? Or is this something that's meant to be more entry-level price point? It comes KD, that sort of thing. So then they get these, and I try to give them a good mix of products. So on average, you might have this fun personality shelf, he might have a bed, he might have a candelabra, and then he might have, a sofa collection. So I think it's great for them to really branch out and be able to design things in a multitude of categories every single time.
Mm-hmm. And Ashton, I should mention that the next brief handoff I can't do any more dining chairs for a bit, okay?
Okay, I promise that I won't
Yeah.
do that to you.
I've got a really tough leather sling chair right now I'm working on. It's kind of killing me, but
I didn't know that that one was going to be so horrible. I thought the plush one was going to be worse for you, honestly, but
yeah, I know, surprisingly.
who knew? So yeah, I promise no more dining chairs for this round. And then yeah, as we saw in the video, we have a design meeting once a week on Thursday. During the pandemic, we actually had design meetings on Zoom, and the designers would present renderings and whatnot. But otherwise, we meet as a group, and there's an agenda, and they basically pin up whatever they have, or they have prototypes that they're sharing. And we all sort of go around and talk about it. Is this filling the need of what the design brief is? What are the things we want to change? You know, is it comfortable? All of those things. And I mean, it's my favorite meeting that I get to be in every week. And yeah.
Yeah, it seems wrong to call it a meeting almost. It's like, you know, it's for the designers anyway, like it's the most important day of the week where we get to, you know, because we're kind of all, especially during pandemic, you know, we're all kind of working on our own, kind of hidden out, not interacting a ton. And then to have that day where we can all come together and evaluate each other's designs and see where the progress, you know, is happening. And it's just so, yeah, it's super beneficial and helpful.
Really fun and collaborative too. It's not a serious meeting when I say that there's agenda. I mean, it is serious because we are reviewing designs, and you know, we wouldn't have a company if we didn't have designs, but in general, the meeting tends to be really fun and enjoyable. All right.
Yeah, so Ashton hands off a brief to me 2 years ago for our first plastic chair. And I think at first it's a little intimidating, and kind of I want to talk through like, why is that? So on the left, you have kind of a typical dining chair that we would make. So this I designed probably 10 years ago, and it's made from more typical materials, right? It's wood. The back is upholstered over plywood. And the way a chair like this works, I will design the chair, and then I'll hand off the model to our engineering team, and they will build up a CAD set. They'll send that to a factory. The factory has a sample shop, and they will charge us maybe $1,000, $1,500 for you know, the first sample, and then we'll ship that in, and we'll all get to sit in it and evaluate the comfort. And oftentimes, like, the seat will be too closed, so meaning the seat will be too upright, and we'll want to change that. Maybe it's too wide. Maybe we need to shrink it down by 2 inches. So with the wood chair, it's just a matter of, you know, sending an annotated photo document to the factory and saying, hey, we need it to be 2 inches more narrow. We need the back to be a little more comfortable. And it's another, you know, $1,000 charge for that sample. But with a plastic chair, you can see that tooling cost. So that 250 grand, we had to pay that up front before we ever see a chair or sit in a chair. So
very high stakes.
Very high stakes, yeah. So you got to get it right. You got to nail it. And that doesn't happen super often. Like, none of us at Blu Dot are like design geniuses. I think we're good at design, but we need to work to get to the good design, or to get to the great design, I should say. So yeah, so it's kind of a challenging thing, and it's a new thing for us. We make plastic parts like for maybe feet for a chair. Like, that's as involved as we've gotten with plastic injection molding at this point. So it's kind of a big jump. But as you can see, like, the trade-offs as far as like the price and the time to produce, like, once you pay for that tooling, it becomes a really attractive proposition. So you can't make a chair, other than a plastic chair, you can't make a chair in under 2 minutes. It's just impossible. So it's almost like magic. So where do I start with a design project? And it always begins in my sketchbooks. I always have like a sketchbook in front of me when I'm working. And you know, as Ashton mentioned before, we often have like 4 or 5 projects we're kind of working on concurrently, and they're maybe in different stages of completion. So maybe I'm sketching on, you know, 2 projects, and then the other projects I'm like computer modeling and I'm waiting on renderings. So I'm always just kind of casually sketching, and sometimes it's mindlessly just trying to create a new form or come up with a new like leg detail that's interesting. So yeah, another page of my sketchbook. So these sketches I would never really share with the team. This is more like mindstorming for my own benefit. Because oftentimes they're too cryptic to mean anything to anyone other than me. So, but they look fun to look at afterwards when you can kind of see where the form kind of takes or is kind of birthed, I guess.
Yeah, these are so fun, and marketing always tries to steal these away from you because they're such great insight to the process and to what goes on in your brain when all of this is happening.
Yeah, and you can see the mix. Like there's some chair details here. There's some lighting, kind of a good mix of whatever I'm working on at the time. Some more chairs, and here's an idea that kind of popped into my head like at the beginning of the process. So on the lower left corner, you can see a chair that has like a removable leg detail, and we'll kind of get back to that further down the line. Here's some more clean sketches. So these sketches are something I would share with the team. And one thing that's really great about all the people we work with in the design team and John and Maurice, the founders of the company, is they're all very design literate. Like I don't have to share totally complete sketches. Like I'm not meeting with any marketing executives who may not understand kind of what I'm gesturing at, I guess. So that's kind of a huge benefit. Here's another more clean sketch that I shared with the team during a design review. Here's another one. So this is that idea of the legs that are kind of removable. So on the left, it's like wooden legs that would kind of thread into the molded plastic shell. And then on the right, it's like a kind of a welded up wire tubular steel base. And then it kind of snaps to the shell somehow. All right, so after I'm sketching for a while and I feel like I've got some decent ideas, that's when I'll kind of make the transition from 2D to 3D. So we use SolidWorks for all our computer modeling at Blu Dot, and it's a very powerful program, and it's fairly intuitive. So it's kind of nice to work with. But yeah, here I am taking ideas that are just in sketch form and fleshing them out and kind of trying to constrain them to like real world proportions. So in a sketch, sometimes you can lose track of like the human form. And this is nice because you can actually, like, I know a seat has to be a certain height, has to be a certain depth for it to be comfortable. So this is me applying those real world constraints to those sketch ideas. Yeah, so I'm just going to share a bunch of kind of initial concepts with you. And a lot of these, I think, looking back, why they're not very successful is you can imagine them all being made out of like tubular steel for the legs, and then like a thin bent ply seat shell for the seat in the back.
Or even like that one reminds me of Dibs, which just came out and is like a steam bent wood. Like that's very close to that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think I was still kind of just dipping my toe in the idea of plastic injection molding for a chair. So I hadn't really dove headfirst in yet. So
we also weren't super knowledgeable about the overall process and like the sort of what you could achieve and what you couldn't achieve. So that was also a huge learning curve with this entire process because it's a totally different way of thinking.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's easy to mold something that's kind of small, and like if you can imagine like molding a foot glide, it's just super simple and straightforward. But then a chair, you've got all these different surfaces, and the mold gets incredibly complex. And you're going to see later exactly how complex that gets. But yeah, so this is still just me trying to propose different form options to the group and, see what people are feeling and what they're kind of not reacting to. This is a totally different concept. So this is more of like a shell with a separate base. So that's a tubular steel base. And I'm kind of toying with the idea of like, it's always great when a chair stacks and stacks efficiently. So that's kind of what this is. But in the end, like the aesthetic is just not Blu Dot. It's kind of anthropomorphic, I think. It's like I don't know, it looks like an insect to me, I guess.
It does kind of look like a bug.
Yeah. So here's another idea of like, this is me just playing with the stacking more. And oftentimes when a chair is a stacking chair, they kind of suffer from a certain sameness because the geometry that lets them stack efficiently kind of drives the aesthetic. So this is me trying to like see if there's a different way a chair can stack, and you know, how that will drive the aesthetic in a different direction. And unfortunately, in this case, I think it doesn't drive it in a good aesthetic. It kind of gets a little too odd.
It looks like it should be a folding chair.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, yeah, I think that's what the team, that's what their comment was for this. And it also doesn't stack very efficiently. Like, I think you could only get, you know, 2 or 3 of each of these chairs stacked up, which isn't great. Especially if we want this chair to do well in a contract setting, that's just not going to be efficient enough. So at that point, I was kind of, I guess, a little restless by being stuck at the computer, trying to come up with ideas and trying to, you know, create a good design. So it's nice to often like change up your process or change up your materials as you're like trying to crack a design problem. So at this point, I kind of went to the shop and got a bunch of Scotch tape and some foam core and just started kind of playing around with different forms. So this is a form that you maybe remember from one of the first like sketchbook shots I showed. So it's more of an articulated kind of a, I guess more of an organic shape than a lot of the other concepts were. In the back, you can see there's a kind of a more rectilinear concept there. And here's 2 more variations on that theme. And so the idea behind these, I thought that it might be handy. So these don't stack. However, the seat and the front legs are one piece, and then the back and the rear legs are molded as one piece. So then the idea was they would ship kind of nested in a box, so they'd pack down into a smaller volume for shipping. And then you could either, maybe they would attach just kind of a, like a snap feature, so they kind of, the 2 halves snap together, or maybe there's some hardware there that you know, put in 3 screws and it locks it in place. I think the criticism or the critique there was that it just maybe wasn't us. It was maybe a little too organic. So I think if you think of Blu Dot on a continuum between, on one end, if you have something that's super organic and flowy, and the other end you have just like a cube, you know, we're probably closer towards the cube than we are to the completely organic freeform end of the spectrum. So yeah, so I had to move on from this idea, but it was still, it was worthwhile to do, you know, as a practice of like just getting off, you know, a computer and just getting back into the real world and using my hands again. All right, so at that point, this is like the second round of concepts. So taking all the feedback I've received along the way, and, you know, we're probably, you know, 3 or 4 design reviews in at this point.
At least.
So yeah, at least. So yeah, here's some other concepts. So a totally different approach. So this idea was still kind of building off that earlier idea that I just shared with you, where the shell would be kind of one piece and the legs would be a separate thing that thread on after. So the end user would then thread them on. So part of the idea was like, if you're using the chair indoor and you want to kind of have like a warmer feel to it, we could sell it with wooden legs. And then for outdoor use, you could sell it with plastic legs. So that's kind of the idea there. So kind of a variation on that theme. So just a different type of base, and kind of the shell is styled a little bit differently too. So these legs are, yeah, just some wood dowels and then a little chassis structure underneath. Another variation. Another variation. So this is the idea to have like a seat pad that's optional. So like kind of an upcharge to have a more comfortable chair if you need it. Good for contract too.
Yeah, feel a little more residential too.
Yeah, definitely.
Indoor.
Yeah. Yeah, and here's another idea of kind of like a more of an armchair concept, like a slight arm to it. Again, I think it suffers from that same kind of anthropomorphic character. It's a little too, I don't know, blobby, maybe. It's hard. It's kind of hard to look at.
Great way to describe it.
Yeah, it's hard to look at some of these concepts, after the fact. Like, it's been so long, and like seeing some things that I shared with people that maybe I shouldn't have.
Look how far you've grown, though. I mean,
I know.
Great.
True. Okay, here's another idea where, so the chair is molded as just one piece and stacking. However, I think 3 is probably the max you could stack here. You can see on that stacking pic, the legs are kind of colliding with the edge of the back seat. So another one with kind of a school chair aesthetic.
I liked this one.
Yeah, this one's not bad.
Just nice and clean.
Yeah, I'm not embarrassed to share this one.
Good.
So from that group, this is what we chose. We chose that first concept where the legs are, there's an option of wood or plastic legs, and they thread on into the shell. You can see in the rendering, there's little threaded inserts that are molded into the shell. All right, so the next step is taking that jump from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions with a real material. And this is like the most critical, I think it's the most critical part of the design process. This is where a design either lives or dies. You can really see, like, if it's gonna be successful, you're gonna see it right away, even if the material is not the true material. You just wanna get a sense of the scale and proportion in real life, because oftentimes the computer screen it can be misleading. Sometimes you'll model something, you'll think it looks proportionally great, and then you build it and you know right away that it's like, oh, this is too wide, needs to be 2 inches shorter, etc. Yeah, so this is me just taking, the cheapest material we have and just foam core and Scotch tape and just quickly making a silhouette and a facsimile of the shell. So on the left, I'm using Rhinoceros 3D to kind of simplify the, I guess that 3D, that sweepy, super curvy shape. Try to simplify it into something that I can then just quickly make. So I'm kind of shattering the surfaces and then smashing them and tracing them onto some foam core and taping them all together. Then after that, we wanted to do a 3D print, full scale, just so we can really get an idea of how it's going to look in reality. So that's what I'm doing here. So I printed it in like 4 different pieces and then glued it all together and used body putty to kind of hide the seams. And then I think 6 cans of spray paint. Something about this material, it's super hydrophobic and the paint didn't want to stick, so that was kind of a nightmare, but I guess it was worthwhile.
For sure.
Yeah, so here we have it. I don't have a good picture of it without the kind of undercarriage. But yeah, the idea was to make an appearance prototype full scale, but then also be able to sit in it to get a feel for the shell shape and make sure it's super comfortable. So that's what I did. That's this plywood is just basically an armature to kind of give the chair structure so we could sit in it. It worked and it was very comfortable. Yeah, something about just all the curves in that shell just really made it quite comfortable. And the flex of the seat was just about right.
Sorry, Scott, in the interest of time, do you want to quickly go through the sort of hurdles that you faced with this one? And then we can talk about starting over.
Yeah. So the real issue here was that as Ashton mentioned earlier, we just didn't have the background in molding, giant objects. So there's a technology called gas assist where if you have thicker and thinner sections adjacent, you use nitrogen gas injected into the tool, and then that packs out the plastic, so you don't end up with those ugly sink marks you see in the upper image there. And yeah, the way the chair was designed, it just wasn't going to work. We thought you could inject the gas into the center of the chair, but you can only do it in certain cases. It can't be a closed loop. It can't be away from the edge. So yeah, so it wasn't going to work. So the factory came up with a bunch of fixes for us. Well, this was the first one they came up with, and it was just antithetical to kind of Blu Dot's design ethos, like adding a bunch of clips, and there's a bunch of lugs and a bunch of unattractive extra screws. So we couldn't do that. I tried to design around it. So this is my approach to separating the two. So that chassis part, that's kind of the idea here, is there's a separate chassis that is captured between the leg and the shell. So I have a bunch of variations on that, just looking at different ways to detail it. And then this idea is like, what if we highlight the sink created by that rib? But that felt like kind of a goofy compromise too. We didn't want to have like this kind of crease throughout the shell. All right, Ashton.
Okay, here's where I broke Scott's heart. No, not really, actually.
No.
As Scott was saying, we didn't know a lot about this process as we were starting it. So Scott designed this chair that we initially really liked, and then we kept sort of having to make these concessions about the design. It became completely overly complicated, and then just functionally, it really wasn't what it should have been. I think, it wasn't stackable, which was a huge driver for this chair and something that is asked for a lot from, trade and contract customers. And it also helps with shipping efficiencies when you can put, 4 to a box and whatnot, and that saves on costs, and it's also more sustainable, et cetera. And then it also wasn't able to flip up on a table. And that is also a huge thing for hospitality. And then it also sort of went away from the entire point of a plastic chair, which was you could have just this one piece, very sculptural object. And suddenly it was multiple parts, and it was this and it was that. And the design details that really brought that chair to life were suddenly not possible. So in a meeting one day, I was talking to Scott and I said, "Do you even like this chair anymore?" And he gave me the most lukewarm answer to it ever. So I just was like, okay, I was like, we have to just hit the pause button on this. So we met with John and Maurice, our founders, and I basically just wanted to just take everyone's temperature. Because as Scott said, this was a huge investment. This was, $250,000 that we were putting into this chair. And I was just like, does this feel right? Like, we lost some of the functionality. We lost this parts of the design that we liked. And we always say that we put, design and functionality as like equal partners. We want this chair to be just as functional as it is beautiful, so that people love it. And, it fits all the needs that it's supposed to, especially with this big of investment. So Scott had to start over. So if I'm gonna go to the next slide. So we definitely set much stronger objectives for his second round. So we said, keep it simple, which is one of our sort of mottos all the time. So it was going to be a one-piece chair, no more removable legs, no more anything like that. We wanted it to be stackable, both for shipping and also for storage ease. The lower accessible price point thing also was driven by the one-piece sort of thing. When you were adding wood legs or metal leg or that sort of thing, you really took out some of that entry-level price point objective that we were shooting for. Easily flip up on a table for hospitality. And then we wanted something that, looks great indoor or outdoor. I think some chairs can go, too strong in either direction. So we wanted something that could be sort of equally beautiful in either setting. And then we also wanted to make sure that it had recycled content. So once we sort of nailed all those things down and gave him more specifics, he got to take another crack at it. And I don't know if that made it harder for you or easier for you that you have these specific sort of things you had to work within now, but hopefully it made it easier.
No, yeah, it was definitely easier. Just honing in on what you need versus what, you think it could be. I mean, it's super helpful. And to be honest, like I was relieved when you came to me and were like, I think you said like, just be completely honest. Like, do you like this chair? And I had to be honest. I just kind of,
I mean, we were pushing it, we kept
Yeah.
pushing it, and you had spent so much time on it. And I think everybody probably felt the same way.
Yeah.
And I mean, we knew that it was going to delay when we were able to bring this chair to market, and we had really high hopes for it. And it was going to, bring in a lot of sales and whatnot. And do I think your other chair would have probably sold? Absolutely. But we decided to pull back and take the time to really do it right, which I'm so happy that we did, because you made a beautiful chair.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So after I, dried the tears, it was time to get back into that sketchbook and try to come up with something better. And like I said, I'm glad I got a redo because the chair, like Ashton said, the chair that we ended up creating is so much better. So here I am sketching again in the sketchbook, and on the middle of that left page, that's where you can see kind of the birth of this idea that became the decade chair. It's kind of all about that rear, like the rear leg kind of goes up and over, and then that stretcher comes across and peels away from the shell. And that's kind of the detail that was like the birth of the decade chair, just that one detail. So here I am kind of fleshing out the concept, using different mixed media to kind of flesh it out and play with the character of the chair. And it's really about that kind of, I started to think about like the framework of the chair. So like the legs and the kind of the back and the stretchers that wrap around the seat. So creating like a skeleton and then skinning that negative space that's created to kind of create the sitting surface. And that like just made so much sense to me.
I love it because it's almost like a sling chair, but in plastic form.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I didn't think of it that way, but yeah. Yeah, so here's another sketch, kind of a cleaner sketch. And here's a rendering. So this is kind of the first thing I shared with the team. I wanted it to feel like more real, more like a complete project or product. Here it is stacking. So yeah, it's pretty amazing that I was able to have an idea that also like really nailed that stacking parameter that Ashton asked for. This chair stacks super efficiently. I think, what do we say?
I think it's like 12 high on the ground, and then we sell a dolly that you can stack even more. So yeah,
Right.
super efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, and now when I'm looking back at these renderings after not seeing them for a long time and, living with the real chair, I can see that the proportions are kind of all off. So the next steps that we take are going to kind of address that. But at the time, I thought it looked good as is. So here's the first step of taking that jump from 2D to 3D. So using foam core and then using black foam core and then using white tape over it to kind of create that silhouette so that we can look at it in 3D and kind of spin it around. We could not sit on this, but just to get an idea of the scale. So the next step is to make something we can sit in. And we do that with insulation foam, like that you get at any Home Depot or store like that. So yeah, what I do is I take my model into our solid modeling program and then kind of slice it, in this case, 1.5 inch slices, and then take those sections and then trace them onto the foam, cut them out, glue them together. And then you end up kind of with a stepped surface and then kind of sand down the high spots. And you end up with, on the right there, you see kind of like the shell of the chair, and that we can sit in. So I made 2 of these. The first one, we all sat in it and we thought it could be, the back could be, it was a little too upright. We could open up that angle a little more. So I probably opened it up, 2 degrees, which can actually make quite a difference in the comfort of a chair. So yeah, so I made 2 of those, and then we felt pretty confident in the comfort. So these are test prints. So these are just 3D prints at scale to test the stacking. So the gray one on the left, those are the first ones I did. And what we noticed there was like they stacked pretty well, but there was still some distance between them and they didn't sit like super flush. So I made a little tweak. They were kind of colliding back at that joint where the rear leg kind of shoots up to the back, and then that stretcher that's horizontal where they kind of intersect. And at this point, we wanted to do a full scale 3D print. So we had this printed in, I think, 6 pieces. Yeah, and it's glued together with epoxy. I printed it all hollow, so it was kind of fun to play with. It's like super light, just to save money, because 3D printing is definitely not cheap, especially at that scale. So this was super helpful. I'm glad we did this. We didn't ever sit in this one because I had those earlier foam insulation seating bucks. But what we learned from this is the seat was still like 2 inches. Well, no, I think it was 1 inch too deep, just visually. So what we did was we took 1 inch out of the final model. And at that point, we contacted the factory, sent them the files, and thankfully they didn't have any changes really. The chair, yeah, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I expected some alterations, like maybe changes to the bottom of the chair just to make it release from the mold, or to add, I thought we maybe would have to add some gussets to the front legs to give them more strength or rigidity, but we didn't need to. And that's kind of one of the things I really love about the design, is that when you pick up the chair and flip it over, like the design concept reads throughout. Like you don't flip it over and see a bunch of weird gussets and ribs that kind of give it structure. Like the initial design concept actually works as intended, and it gives it that structure it needs. So yeah, so here's the mold. So I don't know, to me it's super beautiful, but it's also like so complicated and crazy. It's just giant chunks of steel that are, machined down. There's cooling vents throughout. There's all kinds of gas channels. It's really amazing. There's going to be a video we'll show you of the mold opening. It's almost like a transformer or a robot or something. It's wild. So these are the first shots. So this chair is made in Italy. And unfortunately, when this was all going down was kind of the outbreak of coronavirus. So unfortunately, we didn't get to go there. The plan was for us to be there in the factory when they made the first chairs, but sadly that didn't happen. So yeah, these are the first shots. So the way molding plastic works, there's like several dials the mold operator can change to kind of tune it and get the right fill. So basically you can control the temperature, the amount of plastic, the pressure, the time the mold remains closed. So this is them kind of fine tuning it. So here are some completed chairs. So these look a lot better than that first page. But yeah, this is them getting it tuned in. And on the right, you can see, yeah, it's amazing. It's like magic. I mean, it's wild. Yeah, and on the right, you can see this is the gas assist technology I mentioned earlier. So the legs are quite a bit thicker than the shell itself. So the way they get them to mold properly and be strong and not overly heavy is they shoot that nitrogen gas throughout the thicker sections, and that's kind of how it packs out. Yeah, and here's a video of chair coming out of the mold. So in production, there's a robot arm that picks the parts out of the mold. It's not a guy doesn't have to step in there every time. So anyway. So
now that the chair existed and was a real thing, and we, sent a big check off to Italy for that tool, then it was the fun part, which was basically coming up with a color palette for it. So, we really thought about this, in terms of the entire collection, because we wanted all the colors to look amazing on their own, but also together as a group. So we really tried to think about it in a holistic way. If you want to go to the next one. So again, plastic chairs are really iconic to a lot of different brands. So I think, doing that sort of historical research and having some context around what makes a really iconic chair and color palette and whatnot is really helpful. So we always do a little research because I think it's great to, see what was successful for other people. And then, this is just a really fun way that we do color studies. So this is sort of a glimpse into how we come up with our color palettes and whatnot and how they all work together. And, we find our colors in nature and, fruits and flowers, and there's tile on there, there's fabric on there, there's, a lot of different elements that we are pulling color from, so that we have sort of this fun, unique palette to us. And then there's just another example of that. So then basically once we had narrowed down sort of what we thought, so on the left here is sort of the initial colors that we started with. So we wanted to see these colored chips. So these came from the factory. And then all of these different color sort of mixes are the things that we experimented with. So we were like, okay, well, we know that we need a black and a white because those are, core items and whatnot. But then, what are our balance of warm and cool colors? What are the things that are going to be really, standing the test of time? We didn't want anything to feel overly trend forward. We wanted these to be really classic, sort of timeless color palettes, and but also feel unique to us. So, we have a specific color that's called marine blue, and we use it all over the assortment. So that felt like it was a really easy thing to integrate into this and feels really special. And it feels, like you've seen it, but it's also unique because you haven't seen it in this particular form. So we narrowed it down. And next. So then we came up with our final color palette. So it's a nice, mix of warms and cools and also some neutral options, which I think was really important to us. And more importantly, they look beautiful together and they play well together, and they also play well within our entire assortment, which is also really important.
For many designers, making a plastic chair is kind of a rite of passage. Our initial mission was to make modern design more accessible, and this kind of production process and material allows us to do that.
What's difficult about a plastic chair is that you have to pay an enormous tooling fee up front before you ever see a chair or sit in it. So that adds a lot of pressure because you have to make sure everything's ready to go before you pull the trigger on that tooling expense. I'd like to really start by sketching quite a bit.
We also wanted something that was stackable, durable, cleanable, and something that took color really well, and so it could be a statement on its own.
The birth of the final design was a sketch that was basically the framework of the chair. So it's that line that starts at the rear leg and goes up and over.
And it was one of those things that kind of when you saw it, you knew it. Simple and straightforward, but also timeless.
Injection molding process is something that we had never done before. So we partnered with a factory in Italy that were masters at the craft, and they were just perfect partners in that sense.
When I saw the first Decade chairs come back from the molder, it was super satisfying just to see something that was a few months earlier. It was just lines and surfaces on my computer screen.
It looked like the seat was sort of just naturally suspended in there. It does everything that it should, and it also still felt like us.
So after 2 years of hard work, our first injection molded plastic chair, which we call Decade, is here.
Really uncomfortable watching myself on screen, I'll just say that. So yeah, so that's sort of a 30-second recap of what this entire presentation was about. And then here are just some beauty shots of the chair in action. These were, beautiful catalog images. You can see indoor application, outdoor application, that stacking dolly, how well the colors work together. So way to go, Scott. So great. That is it.
Thank you both so much for walking us through that. That was a really interesting and very cool presentation. Thank you again. Students, we're going to move on to Q&A. So definitely send your questions in. Again, you can find that Q&A button either at the top or bottom of your screen. First question we have is, do you ever find it challenging to convince the rest of the team of a certain design? How do you make your case or defend your design instincts?
That's a great question. Yes, that definitely happens. Yeah, it can be hard. I think the best way to convince people is to just do great design and then be very thorough about how you present it. Sometimes, yeah, if you've got like a really great prototype, that can often help. Yeah.
Yeah, Scott does beautiful prototypes that look like they could be production quality. And so you can tell when he feels really confident about a design because he's basically made an entire lounge chair. And then you are in this design meeting with him and you're like, I can't even argue with any of these things because it's so well thought out. And you're just like, okay, well, it's done. You've done it all. So I think that is really helpful for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Ashton. Yeah, that's kind of my trick, I guess. And then on the flip side of that, if you're the only one who's confident about an idea, that should tell you something as well, because I have a ton of respect for John and Maurice and the rest of the design team. So, and Ashton as well. I mean, that's kind of the point of the redesign was like seeing, her say, like, do you believe in this? And I could not lie to her and say like, yes,
For sure.
Right. That makes sense. I see we have a lot of great questions coming in. We're going to try and make it through as many as possible. Next one is, how do you learn about new processes in manufacturing? Do you research online, consult other professionals or manufacturers? What are the first steps?
Yeah, I will just usually go online and try to learn what I can. And then the rest of it, we just learn through trial and error. Sometimes that's maybe not the most efficient way to do it, but oftentimes that's just how things work out. What would you say, Ashton?
I mean, I would say also we have a really great engineering team that also sort of tries to figure out some of that stuff for us ahead of time as well. So that if it's, talking to a place locally, I know for the plastic chair, there was like, some local injection molding places and stuff. And a lot of times they'll let you sort of pick your brain on those sorts of things. So our engineering team will do a lot of that. And then the design and engineering teams collaborate a lot on some of those initial designs just to make sure that, it's stable and it's, not going to break or tip over or anything like that. So I think that's helpful.
Great. We have one student who has written in, first, I really appreciate this story. It's full of insights, learnings, and is vulnerable. So thank you. In terms of the recyclability of the plastic, how do you learn about what mix of recycled content will work and provide you with the look, feel, colors, strength that you want?
Good question. Yeah, thanks. The recycling component to this chair was really important for us. We really wanted there to be a recycled component to it, and we weren't exactly sure what that meant. And I think what the engineering team came back with was that we should use post-industrial recycled plastic. So that's what the chair is made of. It's 100% post-industrial recycled plastic, polypropylene, I think, to be exact. And the reason for that, so the opposite, or the other option is basically post-consumer recycled plastic. But I think the issue with that is that it's not entirely pure. There's a lot of impurities in that because it's, there's labels and glues and all types of different plastics kind of coming together. So it just wasn't going to be strong enough. So that's kind of how we went with the post-industrial recycled.
Makes sense. I have a two-part question, so I'll ask the first part. Where do you gather your inspiration for design? Do you research or just sketch?
Ashton, you want to start? For your briefs?
Yeah, for my briefs. I do a ton of research. That's like 90% of my job is, I'm scouring the internet for things and, I visit our stores and go into our store markets and, you have the opportunities to travel some places and whatnot. So that's really where I get a lot of inspiration from for when I'm issuing the design briefs, because, you'll see something and you'll be like, oh, that, whatever it is, that console table, that scale of that, something like that, that's something that we don't have. And that's such a need. And that fits such a specific sort of need in the assortment. So that's kind of what I do. And then pull images and inspiration and hand it off to the designers and then get to see what they do with that, which is the most fun as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Like the internet is kind of a big thing for looking for inspiration. However, I don't prefer to be influenced by other design, like furniture design. It's nice when you can be inspired by something totally different, like a totally different aesthetic or a different discipline. I think that's kind of the most exciting place to be inspired, I guess.
Absolutely. Second part of the question, what's the typical amount of time that you spend on a design life cycle, such as from ideation to sketch to prototype to final design?
It really depends. There's a large spectrum. So this chair was 2 years.
Yeah.
The shelf, the decorative shelf that Ashton shared the brief with from the beginning of the presentation, I think that took maybe 3 months from start to finish on my end. But that's, a decorative shelf, like it doesn't have to, there's no ergonomic constraint. So it's so much easier to design something like that. So really quite a range.
Totally category specific. And I mean, there's sometimes too, where like, the first design is it, like thankfully with Decade, like the second time he went back at that, it was like the first thing that he showed us and we were like, oh, that's it. Absolutely. But yeah, then other things can take a super long time. I would say on average, it's like 16 months in terms of design brief, the designer's designing something, sending it off to manufacturing to get quoted and have sampled and whatnot, and then actually like getting it into the mix and the assortment and being able to market it and sell it to everybody. So that's what we shoot for, but it doesn't always happen.
Makes sense. Switching gears, what's the most challenging part for the team during COVID, and what's the company's next goal to approach?
I mean, the challenging part for us was just not being able to, one, it's very hard to, approve most furniture virtually when you can't sit in it or see it or anything like that. So our office was, available to us. So we would if we were having design meetings on Zoom, we would sort of take turns going into the office on our own to look at something, sit in it, whatnot. And then you would sort of write your feedback down for it. And then we would talk about it in the meeting all together when we were virtual. That was the worst part for me. And just like not being around all of that stuff and all of them all the time was definitely a bummer.
Yeah, those meetings that were 100% virtual were difficult. I don't think we really made a ton of progress at that point. I think maybe it was like 6 months where we didn't have a design meeting in person. But at a certain point, we became comfortable enough to all mask up and then meet for that hour or two a week. And that was super helpful.
Yeah, we're a small enough group that, we were able, thankfully, to do that. And, even if the rest of the office wasn't open, we were able to go in for 90 minutes together and get some stuff done. And that was like really energetic and made a big difference in terms of.
Yeah.
Right. What helped you narrow down the final color palette from the initial options?
It was really hard. We had so many that we liked. There were so many different trials. I think the ones that we picked felt the most sort of timeless. There was no particular, one of them, we had like sort of a cobalt blue. We have this color in our palette that's called watermelon. That's been around for a really long time, but we use it in very like small strategic areas. So for this initial introduction of Decade, and we might do more colors down the road of it, we just wanted something that felt like very sophisticated and something that we were not going to get tired of anytime soon. We wanted it to just be something that felt special and that we could stand behind for a very long time and not have to worry about it. And I think that's sort of how we came up with the ones that we did.
Great. I know we're just at time. We have so many wonderful questions, so I'm going to ask just a few more. Thoughts on designer block? How do you get through these creative blocks as a team?
Well, for me, I just like to switch it up, like we said, the designers, we have like 4 or 5 briefs at any one time. So if I'm stuck, I'll move on to a different brief. Maybe it's an easier brief or it's just something in a totally different category and work on that for a while. And then, you have those breakthroughs sometimes, like in the shower at night, you think like, oh, wait, I could switch up the material of this chair and it would actually work. So that does happen too. So yeah, I think stepping back and then coming back to it like a week of kind of not looking at it or playing with it, that can really help and shift your whole perspective on it.
For sure. And I think like from my perspective, when they're struggling with something, I think being reassuring and letting them know that like they can take a step back and take time to sort of work through it is really important for their process, and sort of just having that open communication. And they'll be like, because they do get priorities in terms of design briefs and stuff. So I think them being able to come to me and just being like, I can't work on this anymore right now. I'm so stuck on this. Can I move on to this or this? And yes, it's totally fine. We want you to enjoy what you're doing and make great stuff. And you're not going to do that if you aren't enjoying what you're doing.
Absolutely. How do you know if the furniture will be structurally sound before going into production, if the models are all different materials than the final result?
Yeah, that's kind of on engineering, and we have a great engineering team. When I started back in 2007 with Blu Dot, we didn't really have an engineering team. Like all the designers, we kind of had to just fake it and kind of guess, and it worked out okay. But it's so nice to have an engineering team that has that background and I can go to them and say, okay, here's the chair. Can you do a simulation and just make sure it's going to pass? So.
Yeah, we've come a long way in that. And we also use third-party testing, to have things like BIFMA certification and whatnot, which is really important for trade and contract applications.
SolidWorks specific question. Scott, how long does it take you to create all of your different concepts in SolidWorks?
That's a good question. It's hard to say. I would say that those models, being that they're not rectilinear, so they do definitely take some time. So I guess if I had a concept that was fleshed out in my head, I could probably model it in maybe 2 to 3 hours. But that's if there aren't any surfacing issues or anything like that. But
okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Last question, so I know I've kept you a little bit longer. I'd love to hear from both of you. Ashton, maybe we'll start with you. Any last words of wisdom or advice for the students tuning in today?
Like for me, I feel so lucky because I didn't know that my job was a job. And I feel so grateful that that's, a thing that exists and that I get to be a part of. When I was going to school or thinking about going to school, they basically were like, you have to choose between, do you want to be a designer or do you want to be a buyer, or what is your role? And this sort of thing is such a beautiful mix of all of those things. And I get to use both sides of my brain, and I get to be a part of something that's so creative and fulfilling and wonderful. But I also don't have I didn't want to be a designer, but I wanted to be a part of it. So I think just, learning about all these different paths that are out there for you, and not being afraid to sort of explore different avenues if something isn't working out for you, or if something isn't exactly what you wanted. That's my biggest takeaway for sure.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I would just kind of echo that. And I studied general product design, so I didn't really study furniture design in particular, but I knew that's always kind of what I wanted to do. So I discovered Blu Dot when I was still a student, and I was so close to the Twin Cities. I just decided to go for it and approach them for an internship, and it all worked out. So yeah, just kind of try to hone in on what you're really interested in and kind of what excites you about design, and kind of go after it, I'd say.
All great advice. Well, Scott, Ashton, I want to say a huge thank you. This has been an incredible look into Blu Dot's design process. We really appreciate it. If you want to learn more about Be Original Americas or Blu Dot, you can visit the links that are in the chat for the website. Thank you again so much. We really appreciate you taking the time, and students, will see you on the next one. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks,
everyone.